Already, I can tell for some of you guys, this what if topic definitely seems like it's coming out of nowhere. It's an odd pairing, I'll admit. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer and savior of King's Landing, and crazy, obsessive Lysa Arryn. But it'll only feel that way if you look at things primarily from the show version of GOT. What if I told you that in the Game of Thrones novels, Jaime and Lysa Arryn, formerly Tully, could have actually gotten together, and it was actually close to happening too? In the books of A Song of Ice and Fire, before Robert's rebellion, the fall of House Targaryen, and the disarmament of Jaime as a Kingslayer, his father Tywin Lannister was looking for an alliance with the Tullys of Riverrun. They're a respectable family with a neighboring territory, so it makes sense that Tywin would pursue a match with them for his son and heir with their second daughter, especially since Catelyn was already betrothed to Ned's big brother Brandon around this time. Jaime was even sent to Riverrun at one point as a means of fostering a good relationship between him and Lysa, before the marriage pact was even set in stone. But he seemed more interested in Brendan the Blackfish, her uncle, and all his war stories than he was with her. Which isn't a deal breaker in marriage, as plenty of people here get married without actually loving or caring for one another. But what really stopped this marriage from going through was Aerys Targaryen, the Mad King. At the tourney of Harrenhal, he named a 15-year-old Jaime to the Kingsguard. And as you may know, they are not allowed to have wives of their own. So that Lannister-Tully deal went out the window pretty quick. Though Tywin did try to salvage it by offering Tyrion for Lysa instead of Jaime, but that didn't really work out. Hoster Tully felt insulted that a dwarf was being put forward for the hand of his daughter. But what if in this timeline, Tywin's original plan had come to fruition? What if his oldest son, his pride and joy, Jaime Lannister, married Lysa Tully? So, as per usual when it comes to these what-ifs, I like to keep things within some realm of realism when it comes to the characters, and making these changes plausible within the world, outside of just taking some creative liberties and whatnot here or there. When it comes to the marriage of Jaime and Lysa, this was pretty much set in stone at the time. I mean, Hoster and Tywin were already hashing out the finer details before things went wrong. The only real wedge that was thrown into this, as I said earlier, was Aerys Targaryen. He used to be best friends with Tywin, but upon seeing that Tywin was basically the man that he could only hope to be, he grew jealous of him, became an enemy, and did everything he could to knock him down a peg and humiliate him, like naming his firstborn son to the Kingsguard, which derailed the marriage plot. So if we want this marriage pact to go through, that's what needs to change. But does that make sense? The whole point of naming Jaime to the Kingsguard was to get back at Tywin, and would a hater like Aerys Targaryen pass up an opportunity to hurt his former friend like this, taking away his crown jewel and letting a dwarf be his heir instead? I would say yes, it is possible. I would even say that it's because he hates Tywin that he doesn't let Jaime join the Kingsguard in this timeline. Aerys thinks less of the Lannisters. He thinks they're beneath him, despite being jealous of them. And one instance that really drives this home is what happens with Cersei and Rhaegar. Tywin wanted Cersei to marry the crown prince, but Aerys said that the Lannisters were servants in his eyes, lesser than the crown, and therefore Cersei was unworthy of his son. I could see that same mentality forming for Aerys in this timeline as well. He thinks so little of the Lannisters that he doesn't even think that Jaime is worthy of a white cloak, which is a very high honor in Westeros. But then on the flip side of that, maybe Aerys just doesn't like the idea of Tywin's son, the man he hates, guarding his back at all times. Aerys is known to be very paranoid, so it makes sense that he just wouldn't want to take the chance on Tywin's son, especially after everything he's done to his father. So we can say in this timeline, his grudge towards Tywin and the Lannisters manifests in a very different way, where he doesn't even consider Jaime, even if it means humiliating his dad. Now, I'm sure some people are going to bring up Cersei in the comments, because in the books, Cersei actually convinced Jaime to become a member of the Kingsguard. She told Jaime that Tywin wanted to marry him off to Lysa Tully, and in order to keep him unmarried and close by, she is very manipulative, she seduced him and compelled him to take up the White Cloak before the order was officially sent. It seems like she had a hand in him getting the White Cloak, because she even says that she would help him get one. Now, I'm gonna be honest here, though there are theories, I do not think Cersei did anything important to get Jaime named to the Kingsguard. That was really all Aerys. All she did was open up Jaime to the idea. But even if we do say she had some hand in it, I'm still going with the idea that whatever she did or planned just doesn't work, because in this timeline, Aerys doesn't even want to consider naming a Lannister to what can be deemed as the most elite order of knights. That being said, if Jaime is refused a place on the Kingsguard, then he will marry Lysa Tully. Lysa Tully will eventually become Lysa Lannister, which has a pretty nice ring to it. And this is a pretty heavy change. For one, she'll be the Lady of Casterly Rock one day instead of the Lady of the Vale. Jon Arryn is gonna need a new wife, and this effectively erases their son, Robert in the books, from the timeline. Beyond that, if Jaime is allowed to stay as Tywin's heir in this timeline, he most likely doesn't give up on being Aerys' Hand of the King. In the books, Tywin resigns his hand because his son was named heir to the Kingsguard. This slight was too much for him, so he abandoned his position and went back to Casterly Rock with Cersei, who was also at court with Tywin while he was serving the king. So she wouldn't go back to Casterly Rock either in this timeline and would continue her life at court. Jaime wouldn't be here though, since he wasn't living at the Red Keep with Cersei and Tywin. He'd most likely be at Casterly Rock, stepping into his role as heir and getting accustomed to his duties in the absence of Tywin. So this pretty much cuts off the affair of Jaime and Cersei in this timeline. Lysa would also probably be sent to live at Casterly Rock too with Jaime, since they are gonna get married. There's gonna be this really epic, grand wedding between House Tully and House Lannister, and Cersei is going to be angry that her brother is with someone else. Hopefully she doesn't try to kill her or anything. But regardless of that, I don't really see this being a very loving marriage, to be honest. I think it'll be happier for Lysa since she would be marrying someone who's actually around her age instead of an old man like Jon Arryn. But I don't really see love blossoming here, especially since Jaime didn't seem to have much interest in Lysa to begin with, and at this point in his life, he is very enamored with Cersei. But beyond that, what are some more important changes that happen here? Going back a little bit, I think a pretty big change here is the fact that Tywin remains as Hand of the King as a result of him keeping his heir. Depending on how long Tywin stays as Hand, this changes a lot of things. For example, the people who rose to power as Hand after Tywin left wouldn't. So no Owen Merryweather, no Jon Connington, who was Rhaegar's friend, no Carlton Chelston, who was burned alive by Aerys after finding out about the wildfire plot. And then there was Lord Rosart, the pyromancer, who helped Aerys with the wildfire plot. And he'd still be around even if he isn't Hand because Aerys loved his pyromancers so much. So there's a lot in there. It's gonna be a different experience for Tywin here. He'll still have to deal with the embarrassment that King Aerys is just out on him all the time, and being the primary target for his paranoia as well. Tywin as Hand would also have to deal with the growing tensions between King Aerys and his son Prince Rhaegar. Around this time, things were getting pretty bad between them. Rhaegar was making plans for change in the Red Keep, and Aerys wasn't very fond of the idea that his son was liked by people more than he was. So definitely, one of Tywin's tasks is kind of keeping the peace in the Red Keep, and with talk of Rhaegar potentially overthrowing his father, I could actually definitely see Tywin being a secret Rhaegar supporter for a few reasons. One, because he's an opportunist and always looking for the best option. Two, because he hates Aerys, and right now Rhaegar looks like a much better candidate to be a king than his father. 3, I also think he might still want Cersei Lannister to become queen. Even though Rhaegar is already married to Elia at this point and has children, that hasn't stopped people from scheming before. It wouldn't stop Tywin, especially with the knowledge that Elia doesn't exactly have the easiest time giving birth. Her daughter Rhaenys left her bedridden for half a year, and her son Aegon almost killed her. And she was warned that another kid probably would. So I could definitely see Tywin keeping Cersei in his back pocket, just in case something happened to Elia. I don't know if Tywin would try to expedite things with her on that front though. While it is common knowledge that Tywin is not beyond underhanded tactics to get what he wants, in the time between Rhaegar's betrothal, marriage, and Tywin's resignation as the Hand, he didn't seem to make any moves towards getting rid of Elia until the rebellion, if I'm not mistaken. So Tywin might leave her alone, but with his status as Hand being prolonged a little longer than canon, he might eventually come up with some idea to do something about her. It would probably be pretty easy as well, considering that Maester Pycelle is still around at the Red Keep, and he's always been a servant of House Lannister. Maybe he could put something in her drink and then watch her go. Or another alternative that I actually find way more likely now that I'm thinking about it, is that if Tywin is actually planning to help Rhaegar become king, he might plot for one of Jaime and Lysa's children to marry one of Rhaegar's, or maybe Prince Viserys. Like I said, Tywin is an opportunist, and he wants to solidify his legacy. He wanted to do that by making Cersei queen, but once he realizes that that is pretty much a dead end, he'll definitely pivot. If Rhaegar is more open than Aerys, he'll definitely consider a Targaryen-Lannister marriage when he becomes king, especially if Tywin helps him do it. Tywin would probably push for his granddaughter via Lysa and Jaime to marry Rhaegar's son, Prince Aegon, and if possible, if that doesn't plan out, maybe Prince Viserys, so we can have some connection to the Targaryen family through blood. But regardless of what he decides to do, I actually think that Tywin is not going to live long in this timeline if he remains the Hand of the King. The steps that led to Robert's rebellion are still going to happen in this timeline. I don't think Jaime marrying Lysa or Tywin being Hand changes any of that. Rhaegar is still going to run off with Lyanna Stark, whether it's because of love, like the show makes it out to be, or because Rhaegar is so obsessed with having a prophecy baby that he, a man in his 20s, manipulates a teenage girl into having it, it still happens. This prompts Rickard and Brandon Stark to turn up at King's Landing to demand Lyanna's return. Brandon yells for Rhaegar to come out and die, then seeing them as a threat, Aerys resolves to kill them. Tywin, however, would most likely try to talk him out of killing two Starks because this is madness and guaranteed war, and he may be aiming for a more peaceful transition of power when it comes to Aerys and Rhaegar, something that can be handled behind closed doors. This would definitely derail things, but then again, I don't think anyone was expecting that he would just run off with a Stark. Regardless though, if he wasn't happy about Ned getting his head lopped off in canon, then he would not like Rickard Stark getting burned alive and his son Brandon being strangled to death. Before it even gets to that though, he tried to give Aerys some alternative punishments for the Starks. That way Aerys can feel like he's doing something without letting them off scot-free. Aerys isn't going to be very receptive of this though, and in fact, I think he'll be angry that Tywin is even making this offer to begin with. Aerys hates Tywin. He's paranoid and wary of him because he sees him as a threat. People have been saying for years that it was Tywin who was really the one who ruled the Seven Kingdoms and not Aerys. This led to a festering jealousy in him that only got worse over time, and I can only imagine how bad it would have gotten after the extra time Tywin has spent as his hand, especially considering how bad his mental state ends up getting as time goes on. He would definitely start thinking that Tywin was plotting against him because he wanted the throne for himself, and would see him trying to save the Starks and avoid war as him undermining his authority, and the Mad King can't have that. So he says if Tywin is willing to defend treason, he must be treasonous himself. He brands Tywin a traitor. With the help of his pyromancers, Tywin is burned alive, alongside Rickard Stark. So Tywin, Rickard, and Brandon all die at the hands of the Mad King. This is pretty terrible to think about when it comes to Tywin, not because he's a good person or anything like that, but because Cersei would have still been in the capital with him this whole time. So imagine she just watches her dad die, the last parent she has left. She'd definitely be taken as a hostage afterwards, and then word would be sent to Jaime Lannister to come to King's Landing and bend the knee to Aerys. Tywin's death would be very big here, because Jaime effectively becomes the Lord of Casterly Rock, and the moment he hears about his dad being burned alive and his sister being held hostage, he would immediately join the rebels with Robert, Ned, and Jon to get justice and get his sister back. The Stab Alliance will become the Stable Alliance, with no E, mind you. So Ned and Jaime could actually have a much better relationship in this timeline. Since their fathers were both burned by the Mad King, they have a common enemy now, and common wives because they each married a Tully sister. So they're kind of related in a way when you think about it. I would even say at this point Lysa is pregnant with Jaime's child, which is also fitting because around the start of the war, Catelyn was also pregnant with her son Robb, so the North and the Westerlands are already off to a much better start than canon. This would pretty much spell the end for the Targaryens, to be honest. People were already slow to lend help to the Targaryens at this point, but if the Starks, Tullys, Aryans, Baratheons, and the Lannisters are all gunning for the crown, there is no way they're winning this. I'm sorry. The Targs would get steamrolled. Rhaegar would still die on the Trident, and when the time comes, the rebels would march on the city of King's Landing. But before they get there, the important question we have to ask is, with the absence of Jaime from the Kingsguard, does the Mad King manage to blow up King's Landing with the wildfire plot? And I do still think this would be a thing in this timeline. If you don't know, the whole reason the plot was even thought up is because Jon Connington, Rhaegar's friend, failed to kill Robert and lost the Battle of the Bells. This solidified Robert as a threat to Aerys and caused him to make up the plan. So if we say the Battle of the Bells still happens here in this timeline, or some other major battle that solidifies Robert as a threat, then yes, the wildfire plot would still be a thing. I feel like it would be really easy to say no, because Jaime wasn't the only Kingsguard in existence at this time, and surely any sane man in his position would have stopped Aerys, right? but there are factors to why Jaime was even in a position to do something about the plot in the first place. While he isn't the only Kingsguard in general, he was the only one in King's Landing. Barristan Selmy, Luwin Martell, and Jonathan Dari were all fighting with Rhaegar on the Trident. Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, and Arthur Dayne were at the Tower of Joy. So that's 6 of the 7, leaving only Jaime. Jaime was tasked by Rhaegar to keep his family safe while he was gone, but beyond that, Aerys just wouldn't let Jaime out of his sight. This is really why he was able to stop Aerys, in my opinion. The king was so paranoid of Tywin's son that he kept him close, and as a result of keeping him so close, Jaime learned about the wildfire plot to burn the city, and took action after he was ordered to kill his own dad. Jaime seems like he was just in the right place at the right time to learn about this and then be able to do something about it. In an alternate universe where Jaime has no white cloak, I don't see whoever ends up replacing him catching the attention of Aerys to the point where he keeps him around all the time, especially since he's so paranoid and suspicious of everyone except his pyromancers and Maester Pycelle. That being said, if there is no one around to hear Aerys say he'll leave Robert a Kingdom of Ashes and stop him, then bye-bye King's Landing. Aerys will die, Pycelle will die, Varys will die because he was in the city too, I believe. Rhaegar's family will most likely die if they aren't spirited away. Cersei is being held hostage in the capital, so she would also die as well, and the realm would be in ruin. The rebels arrive at a harrowing scene. The capital of the 7 kingdoms is naught but ash and ruins, like old Valyria come again. This would be a pretty devastating blow to Westeros as a whole with the destruction of their central government. Even though Robert during the rebellion expressed that he would take the Iron Throne and become king himself, there is now no Iron Throne to claim, no symbol of power or legitimacy, and as I said, no real government to acknowledge his newfound authority. And I don't think people would really want to be ruled by a guy from Storm's End if Robert still decided he wanted to be king and make Storm's End his capital. This would take so much away from a rebel victory, which it really can't even be called at this point, since they didn't win the prize, the Iron Throne. And because of the destruction of King's Landing, it would create a power vacuum in Westeros. Now, truth be told, Viserys would still be around since he wasn't away to Dragonstone in canon, but I don't think too many people would be eager to bow to a child king, especially if he has no throne to claim. Least of all, the Mad King's son. They would not want a repeat of this. In a case where King's Landing and the authority of Westeros is destroyed, I think these 7 kingdoms go back to being 7 kingdoms. There is no real point fighting for a throne that no longer exists, except prolonging a war that really had no winner. Robert would go back to Storm's End, Ned would go back north, possibly picking up Jon along the way, Jaime would go back to the Westerlands with Lysa, and I think he would be affected the most by the destruction of King's Landing, to be honest. Having his father burned alive, and then having his sister Cersei killed in an explosion later on, it would feel like he fought for nothing. He's so much more melancholic as a person, and even more cynical than he was before. He may even start drinking like his brother Tyrion too. Maybe instead of Kingslayer, he earns himself the name Jaime the Drunken. So there is a lot going on here. The seemingly small change with the marriage of Jaime and Lysa had some pretty catastrophic effects in the long run, flipping the story on its head. Or at least, that's how I saw things playing out. There are endless possibilities when it comes to these what ifs, but you guys let me know what you thought in the comments and what changes you think would have made sense as well. Other than that, don't forget to like, subscribe for more videos, and I will see you all next time.